welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I'm your host, Kimberly Cloud. I have a very, very special guest here for the show today. Can you go ahead and announce to the world who you are and where you're calling from?
My name is Steve Abramowicz. I'm the host of the Heartland Journal.com's podcast, and I am talking to you from Nashville, Tennessee, in the great state of Tennessee.
Great. And can we go ahead and I used to live in Tennessee. I actually used to live in Clarksville, to be quite honest, Fort Campbell. And can we talk about your past? Because I'm eager to learn about your past leading up into your present and what you do now.
Sure. I'm born and raised in Napa, California, grew up in Southern California, went to college at the University of Southern California, moved to the Bay Area in the old Transamerica building to start my business career, but ended up in Washington State for the last 20 years, where I met my wife, had my children, raised my dogs. And about just under 2 years ago, we picked up and moved to Tennessee so my daughter could have the last 2 years of her high school in an amazing school in Brentwood, Tennessee. And we're proud to say she's going to be going to Auburn in the fall. So she loved the South as much as we did once we got here.
Great. And tell me the story about, you have an amazing history. Tell me the story about how you created your podcast and news company.
Okay, well, thanks for asking me. I love to tell the story. So just about 4 years ago, right in the heart of COVID, I had moved the family to Snohomish County, Washington, after many years in King County for lots of reasons. But we got there, and I ended up befriending a man who in 1991 had moved to Mill Creek, Washington from Michigan. 82nd Airborne veteran, a man who loved karaoke, had a wonderful wife, and started a hometown newspaper dedicated to giving the news to the community and employing children aged anywhere from 6 sometimes to 16 years old who couldn't get a job at McDonald's or anywhere else, delivering newspapers the old-fashioned way, real print newspapers that would get your fingers inky. Well, COVID got him. He was in the hospital. Wasn't allowed to have a guest. Couldn't see his wife. Couldn't visit him. They were basically, the state of Washington was going against the visitation rights of spouses, and he ended up passing away. But before that, his wife had asked Fred. His name was Fred Philbrook. Fred, if something happens to you, what do you want to do with this newspaper? You've created a legacy. What would you want to do? And she said, call Steve. The reason I knew him is because my daughter was one of those girls who couldn't get a job at age 15, didn't have a car, wasn't legal to drive, and got a job with Fred delivering the newspaper. Well, because she didn't have a car, that means I got a job too. So I had to take her to her routes, wait for her to deliver, take her to the next route, whatever. But I would also go back and I would chat with Fred. I would drop off extra papers, come back and get, if we're missing one, whatever, pick up her paychecks. And so he got to know me a little bit, and unbeknownst to me, I guess he thought I had something in me that could do this, because I did not have a background in media or have ever started a hometown newspaper before. I had read them, and I definitely agreed with that philosophy that we wanted to keep the hometown a hometown and not let the big conglomerates, the Gannett's of the world, come in and take over. And I said, sure, I will try this. I will get it back up to its weekly subscription, and then hand it off to somebody I could maybe find who could do it better. Well, that was 2 years later that I finally created the website and the podcast. It was called the Mill Creek View. And April 1st, I decided that it was time to go bigger. And so now the Heartland Journal covers flyover country, all over the country, everywhere. We like to say it's like the Wall Street Journal, only everywhere else. But we will cover Wall Street if we have to. So through the website, which is going full guns, very successful, and the podcast, which we're up to 220 episodes yesterday, still going with a host in the Pacific Northwest named Vincent Cavallari, and me. It was the Tennessee podcast, but now I will cover arts, entertainment, culture, politics, sports, anything that's interesting to me at any time, all over the world and country.
How many people as a whole can you grasp that you have that's following you right now?
Oh, well, the newsletter goes out that just started April 1st to about 10,000 email addresses. And we're always asking people to grow. So if you subscribe and give us your email address and your zip code, the news will be delivered directly to your in basket every day. So that's going to grow very well. And then as far as page views, last month, the report came in at 47,000, which is fantastic for a website that's only been open for 2 months. Because I like to post quite a bit how CNN.com, FoxNews.com, BBC.com, Bloomberg.com, their news website viewership is declining quite a bit. So at least some of them are coming over to us because we're doing it differently. We're not part of the corporate culture that says we're only going to talk about what we want you to talk about. We're talking about what's important. And so, yes, thank you for asking that question because we are doing very, very well. And as far as the podcast is concerned, it's always growing quite a bit. We've had shows where the guest will drive, obviously, the clicks. And then there's just the daily live at 5 p.m. Eastern time on Rumble. We'll get anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 to 10,000 listeners, depending on the subject matter and the topic and the artwork that we put on of who the guest is.
And if somebody wanted to be a guest on your show and or be in your newspaper and whatever other newspaper you have, how do they get signed up and what is the criteria?
Well, the first thing would be talk to me. So they could send me an email at steve.heartlandjournal@yahoo.com. You can see that on the website, so it's no secret. We would discuss the topic of interest to that person. And if that meant a Seattle-based website or a podcast, they would meet with Vincent. Vincent Cavallari is the host of that show. He is a deputy sheriff in Snohomish County, has worked there many, many years under the Fortney years, which people loved him. He's no longer the sheriff, unfortunately. He's also a Mill Creek City Council member, Mill Creek, Washington. So lots of topics for him. And then if it's something for national, it'll be for me. And then, of course, people like you who have their own shows, we would bring you on and talk about what your topics of the discussion are and your interests, and we would promote that show through all of our media channels.
So when you do these shows, what, like, you just hit hot topics, or do you just is it scripted or non-scripted?
I write it. I try to do I'm getting a reputation for being very thorough. Vincent shows are very, very learned and thorough as well. And so, it's an hour-long show live at 4 p.m. Central Time, my time, or 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And so what we do is long-form question and answers. So if we have topics that we brought them on for, or they are specialists in, we're going to gear the show around that. So I've had, let's say, Michelle Blanton, who writes Western novels from a pioneer female perspective. So of course I did a lot of homework on other people who do books like that and the book selling business in general, what it's like to be an author, and gear the questions about like that so that they have an opportunity to shine and show anyone who doesn't already know who they are, how smart they are, or how experienced they are, or what their process is. So if you were just interested in how do you write a book, you would learn something like that from that person. But then we've had politicians who are running for office. So we ask them what their campaign platform is, what their priorities are, what they want to do if they were to win, why they are the better candidate than maybe their opponents. We've had people who are whistleblowers from, certain agencies in the U.S. government who won't be asked to come on from CNN or Fox News and get their perspective, but we want it. So we'll bring them on, and then we'll drop into their social media, their Twitter, their Facebook. We'll drop the show so people can say, well, I've already interested in what that person had to say in a tweet. What do they have to say if given 35, 40 minutes to talk about whatever it is, because we won't hear them 60 seconds on, Tucker Carlson or whatever. So it is geared towards being the voice of the voiceless.
What platforms? I love what you just said. What platforms do you stream from?
All of them. So we're live on Rumble. You can hear the audio on YouTube because that's where everybody apparently is, unfortunately. But we are Podomatic based. So that means it goes to Apple, which is iTunes, Spotify, Deezer, iHeart, Amazon, everywhere. You can't miss it. Just Google Heartland Journal podcast and you'll be overwhelmed with the resources. So basically your favorite podcast platform, you can get it. And if you want to look at us and see me like dance around, which I don't really do, it's static, Rumble.
What kind of other politicians have you had? Like, can you name names of the politicians you had on your show?
Yeah, sure. So in Washington State, we were blessed to have had Steve Hobbs, who's the Secretary of State. We have Pete Serrano, who's running for Attorney General. In my state, I had Marsha Blackburn, who's the state senator. I've had Gino Bolso and Scott Sapicki, who are our state assemblymen. I've had, oh gosh, let's see, so many. I've had radio talk show hosts that cover this area and Eastern Tennessee, like Michael Yaffe, Matt Murphy, Pamela Furr. I've had Trey Hargett, who's the Secretary of State here in Tennessee. I've also had some folks from outside of Tennessee. I've had Oklahoma congressmen. I've had a lot of non-governmental organizations, folks who deal with, say, election integrity or child trafficking from Virginia, that work very closely with secretaries of state and attorney generals, even more importantly. And so I've had the attorney general from Tennessee, Jonathan Scarmetti, on, who's, I think there's about 60 lawsuits that they have filed with other states against the District of Columbia because of federal overreach into the state's rights. We've talked about that. Some of the other names are escaping me off and candidates. Whenever somebody is trying to knock off an incumbent and has a hard time getting their message out because they can't afford Seattle Times advertising, they come on our show because maybe it's the only game in town. And I'm proud to say that there was a election for mayor in Nashville, and one of the gals, she happened to be the Republican, was not getting heard by the Tennessean or any of the radio stations. So she came on my show and actually won it past the general to get to the primary. Or I might have that backwards. I forget. I'm blanking. But long story short, it was a crowded field of about 8, and she was one of the 2 who made it through that and actually came on the show. So I'd like to think the show had some impact. We also had a doctor in Texas who was being unfairly stripped of his license by what we discovered was a very not above board medical board. And after the show, within 24 hours, he got his license back. I think they were nervous that the lawyer who came on with him too was going to get really serious. I don't know if they heard the show or not. I can't say it was that, but I'm going to say we had a hand in it. So we tried to do the best we can for people who are not being heard in politics, sports. We've had Riley Gaines on. If I get wind of somebody out there trying to shout from the rooftops, please listen to me. I have something important to say. And I think it's important as well. I do have editorial discretion. I want them on my show.
And how does your creativity grow for the future of your podcast and newspaper line?
Well, the goal of the Heartland Journal is actually to have 6 hosts, 6 different shows running at the same time from all different areas, because I can't do it all myself, right? I have actually is not my day job, right? I have a actual financial business that I'm trying to keep going and do what I have to do for my clients, but I do this maybe 2 or 3 hours a week. So I'm trying to get a stable of more voices like me to do this. So Vincent is 2. We're looking for 4 more, hopefully somebody in the Ohio Valley area. Somebody in Hollywood would be fantastic. I have a Florida show that we got about 15 episodes out, and then she went on to something more national too. So she couldn't do just regional anymore. So I'm still looking for that. Wisconsin, Kentucky. We're looking to recreate the mold that I've created elsewhere. And that, of course, will drive the subscribers to the heartlandjournal.com, because it's going to be news in that flyover country, in those important markets that aren't getting it. The hometown newspaper like Mill Creek View is surrounded by the big box newspapers. And so those people hate that newspaper. They don't want to read the Linwood Times or the Herald Journal because it's it's USA Today type stuff. It's like not real news. They're not telling you what's happening in their neighborhoods. This does. So that's the model that we're trying to roll out nationwide, is multiple podcasts telling those voices that I can't get to, that so they can be heard faster and more often, and then a dedicated news source to their areas and their interests that they can't get elsewhere.
Wow. I wanted to know about Donald Trump and Biden. They have a debate that is brewing and about to take place. Tell me a little bit about, do you talk about the mainstream media stuff, or do you, because you said you hit only the people that kind of, you might as well say, been blacklisted from the mainstream media like CNN, and they don't want them to be heard because they know that they have a powerful voice type people.
Right.
So do you talk about them at all? What is your input personally? And if you don't want to talk about it, it's fine.
Oh, I'm happy to talk about anything because it's all out there on the show. So the show is actually divided into two pieces. So in that hour, it's usually 45 minutes question and answer with a guest, and then the last piece is what we call Steve and Steve. My producer's name is Steve. My name is Steve, as you can see right there. And so that will be, I write it, and it'll be whatever I want to talk about topically now, whether it be medical information that's come out since we were all very scared and confused from COVID, or about craziness on college campuses, or media in general and how they act like this, and how you can have a 5-minute clip of them saying something over and over and over again across multiple networks, and none of it's true. Those type of conversations are being had on the show every time, and so that's the homework I do. And so with a lot of the times the content that I'm getting for writing the show comes from the news I'm getting for the website. So let's say in the morning you get your email and you read about Idaho and the lack of water that they're delivering to the farmers. You may hear more in-depth conversation about that evening on the show between Steve and myself, just to make sure that, again, all different channels of communication are getting the news that I think is more important, because odds are you will not hear on CNN that night or Fox News that night about the farmers in Idaho lacking water. You may ultimately hear about it, but we try to be first. We try to be early. We've talked about microplastics in the body. We've talked about, because we also have a health and fitness section of our website. Scott Jansen, who is the owner of Fast Eat Live, he is the one who writes that column. A new one out today, as a matter of fact. So we've talked about microplastics and water therapy and eating right, low carb, low sugar, high protein meal, whatever he's into, that's his specialty, and we promote it. And so the content for the Steve and Steve segment of the podcast will very often parallel what we're trying to express out there in the world on the bigger stage. And so when it comes to DC, absolutely, at one point I thought about changing the name to Follow the Money Podcast, but that's a little too cliche, because we always try to flesh out, you realize the money's going there and it was wasted this way or that way, or on this work program or on this social program, whatever the case may be. And viewers seem to like it.
Well said. You are like the vein, and CNN, ABC, CBS is like the arteries. Either way it goes, it's going to the heart of the people, and I feel like right now, with that being said, where do you see yourself going with this company as a whole in the future?
Well, what I've learned in my 4 years now of experience in media, because like I said, I wasn't trained for this or didn't go to college for this, but it came to me in my late years, is that people like Rupert Murdoch or Jeff Bezos or Carlos Slim from Mexico, who bought the Washington Post, they can do journalism all day long with the change in their cushions of their couch, right? And so because they actually would rather have someone else pay for it, because they're businessmen, they don't want to go broke doing it, and they won't. they can push out any media narrative they want, and they can also make sure that nobody ever tells you how bad things are at Amazon, because he owns both, right? So why would he have a newspaper dedicated to telling you there may be something wrong at his companies? We don't have that problem. So because we are doing this without advertising, without just using social media for the most part, we'll put it that way, we are able to say whatever we want if it's true. And of course, we're responsible for things that are said that are not true, but we try to do a very good job of saying, you're not going to hear this anywhere else. This is true. You need to know it. And then maybe why. You leave it up to the viewer or the audience to think for themselves as to why we're telling you this. But if you can't figure it out, we may say like, well, you know, it's because of a precedent that was set in 1976 through this act or this bill, and now we're living through it right now, et cetera, like with colleges. Why does Stanford not teach Western Civ anymore? Well, we just did a show going all the way back to 2010 when this first started being a thing. No more Western Civ. So where do I see it going from here? I think I'd love it if it caught on, and more people were saying, that's a trusted news source, Heartland Journal. Forget the Wall Street Journal, forget the New York Times, forget these rich advertising-driven media infotainment sources, and let's go with what Steve's trying to tell everybody, because it's teaching me something. You know, we got a problem in this country. You know, there's not a lot of kids are graduating school that can read at levels. There's not a lot of jobs out there for these people. Like I was telling you, you know, if a big newspaper comes into town, they don't need the little one. So they're not jobs for the people that right there on the ground who also want the news as well as the sports and the weather and what movie is playing downtown. What we're trying to do is say, look, we're creating industry to keep the hometowns, heartland vibrant, and a place that you want to be, that does actually have the culture. And it's not just some barren wasteland of dried grass. It's actually where people live. The manufacturing's gone, but what else is there? Well, there's always news that can help them rally around a candidate like you, who can go on to bigger things that are looking out for them. And you won't get that if all we have in America is USA Today or CNN.com, because they don't care about Mill Creek, Washington, or Topeka, Kansas, or St. Louis, Missouri, for that matter. It's just the way it's going. It's either DC or New York or LA. Well, there's a lot in between, and that's what we're trying to do. And that's a big deal. So like I said, the more subscribers we get, the more viewers we get, the more hosts we get, the more we can cover that blanket of this country. Very little international. So if you're looking for that, we're not up to doing that right now. We want to focus on our country just in time for an election.
And how do you feel like, you know, personally, this is going to go with all your knowledge from all the senators and congressmen and sheriffs? You know, like, how do you feel like this is going to go, really?
When you say this, do you mean the company's future or the country's future?
The country's future, since
because they are tied together. Yes, I believe
both.
Yeah, I think they are tied together, and I believe that if the people that I'm talking to, who are the 67%, I think it was, of Christians who did not vote last time around, or the blue collar person who doesn't have time to read the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal because they're not talking to them anyway, so why would they be interested? I can give them a voice that they will listen to and maybe even interact and talk back with us to be activists, because in the state of Tennessee, for example, the turnout for voting is very bad, very low. And you can't have a country like that if people don't participate, because the people who don't have our interests in mind, the big money, Chicago, Detroit, Baltimore, Seattle, San Francisco, whatever, you name it, they're going to make all the decisions. But if the people in the middle, where there are a lot more of us, actually know what's happening, engage, spend just 1 hour a year or every 2 years really, and know who they're voting for, a little bit of vetting, a little bit of understanding, we could change this country back to what we all seem to want. Because I hear from everybody, black, white, yellow, green, purple, black, it doesn't matter, complaining about how America, they're all crooks and they're taking advantage of us. Well, we voted for them. you and I may not have, but somebody did along the way, and enough to get them into that office to create this exact circumstance that we're complaining about. Well, you don't have to complain about it. You just need to spend a little time getting up to speed on who they are and vote accordingly. And that will say there's a ripple effect. It helps education. It helps jobs. It helps people who want to move from one place to another in the country to know that, well, is that a good place or is it as bad as it is here? And CNN's been telling me forever that the South is this terrible, awful place. Well, I'm here to tell you it's not. But you wouldn't know that because the advertising folks and the people at the top making the editorial decisions, they're not invested in telling you that. But I am, and I have nothing to lose because I'm not going to lose advertisers over this. I'm going to hopefully gain some in the future in a healthy economy where businesses are hiring people and have extra money to spend on advertising and all this kind of thing. So it's a great spiral effect for the betterment of the country if there are more people like me than less, which is why I'm happy to have people on. I've had Kansas City, a radio station hosts on. I've had people from Alabama. I've had book writers from all over the country, Southern California even, because the more geographically spread the word is, the better the whole country's fabric becomes. Don't you think?
Yes, it really do. And you were saying earlier about Tennessee not voting. Is there more geriatric or baby boomers in Tennessee? I have a reason to ask that question.
That's a good question. The University of Tennessee has sort of come alive in the last 5 years with their sports program. And so there are a lot more. I know it sounds strange, but it is the largest university in here. And it's not as crazy as you just saw as, say, Columbia or Berkeley or Stanford or UCLA. So it's getting an attraction of younger people than it has ever had before. As a matter of fact, in the last 12 months, 80,000 people moved to Tennessee. The state is 250 years old, and it's the first time they've ever done that. So something's happening here that's attracting the young people. Because in the old days, when I was young, living in Southern California, people would get on the bus and move out to LA because they wanted to be actors and actresses if they were smart, attractive, could act, you know what I'm saying, or sing. That was where the famous people went. Well, all of a sudden, Nashville is back on the map as the singer-songwriter capital of the world. John Bon Jovi just opened a bar here. So the magnet has turned and people are actually coming here now. So the demographics are changing because up until, say, if we had had this conversation 5 years ago, maybe 10, the answer would be yes. It's getting older. The farms are getting sold. People are dying off. The young people don't want to be farmers. They're going back to LA and New York to go be famous. They're now coming back here. So the demographics are changing. And so this election that we're going to see in 5 months from now, depending on when you see this, could be last month. You check me if I'm wrong. will determine if it is getting young, because there's a certain candidate who is actually doing better than the last several of his party with the youth vote, as well as the minority vote, which the state has a lot of, and so does Alabama, just south of us, and Kentucky, just above us. So if I read the exit polls, as I anticipate doing, because the show does have a lot to do with politics, I'm often number one in the politics category on Podomatic, where we platform the show. That's how it gets to Spotify and iTunes and all the rest. If I'm right and I read these polls, I have a feeling Tennessee is going to look a lot different than it has for many, 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 many years.
So are y'all doing infrastructure right now as we speak, since John Bon Jovi has been opening up this restaurant? Oh, great.
So yeah, John Bon Jovi just opened up his restaurant. So rock and roll is now added to Broadway, which has so many country artists from Dierks Bentley to Jason Aldean to John Rich to Eric Church just opened. Garth Brooks opened one. Miranda Lambert has one. Luke Combs has one. So downtown Nashville on Broadway is quite amazing. It's like Disneyland for adults. And it's also the bachelorette capital of the world. So a lot of bachelorettes from Bowling Green and Florida and whatever, they'll come here to hit these bars. And then they've got Kid Rock has one too. So he was kind of quasi rock and roll until Bon Jovi there. So even that observation of yours is brilliant because the demographics has changed enough where somebody said, hey, I'm known for rock and roll from New Jersey, but I want to open up a bar in Nashville, Tennessee, of all places, to benefit from the growth and interest that people have in music. Just doesn't matter what genre of music, but music. And so John Bon Jovi has been embraced quite a bit. I'm proud to say, actually, because I know somebody who wrote 50 of his hits in their career together. So shout out to Billy Falcon. That is exactly the point. The demographics are changing with a booming economy, with a successful interest in American values, which I believe Nashville encapsulates. And the same goes for Chattanooga, Knoxville, Pigeon Forge, where Dolly Parton lives. Tennessee in general is changing the perception for those who are willing to know about it. But I bet you, if you were to go, Kimberly, to say Kentucky or Idaho or Iowa or Ohio, you would see this exact same renaissance of where the people, the grassroots, have a much different opinion than what you would see if you dropped out of the sky after 20 years and turned on CNN or visited DC. That is not the culture anymore. That is not what America is. And we're actually pushing back quite a bit, saying they used to say politics was downstream from culture. Well, they flipped that, and all of a sudden culture was downstream from politics. The politicians started driving the narrative, and the country didn't buy into that. The TV stations did, but my website and the people I know did not. And so 300,000 left California. They went to Texas, Tennessee, or Florida. 500,000 left New York. That's taxpayers. Those are business owners. They went to Florida. They went to Texas. So something's happening, and it's not like the Civil War where everybody's shooting at each other and you're killing brothers against brothers. They're just deciding, I don't want to be overtaxed and underinformed in that part of the country. I'm free to go anywhere I want because I'm an American. So I left Washington State for Tennessee. I chose it. I could have chosen anywhere I want. I could have went to Idaho, but I chose here. Same thing for they're calling it the Great Migration. Millions of people who have left. Well, I don't want them to leave and bring their voting record and change the state. I want to actually deliver them news that they didn't get at their old residence because they're asking me without telling me. We're hungry for that. And if I could, just a little anecdote. When I was in Mill Creek, leading up to the last election, November 2020, I think that was, Trump Biden, I opened a second newspaper called the Snohomish View, about a half an hour drive from Mill Creek View, and they loved it. They couldn't get enough of it. The problem is I couldn't afford it very long, but I did make it all the way past the November election, so they could hear from candidates that they never would have even known were on the ballot. For example, there was a guy who ran for county prosecutor. They had not had a candidate from that party run for that office in 20 years. And it's actually a conservative county. So had he not written for me and had not advertised for him in print, the whole town of Snohomish, 10,000 people, would never have known that he was running for office. So that's the key. And I knew from the success of the readership that this would work if I just did it everywhere else, because it's lacking, and it's been gobbled up into just a few hands at the top, the Bezoses and the USA Todays of the world. That leaves me everywhere else. So why not?
I was just telling my audience, I have one last question, but I was to piggyback off of what you were saying. I was telling my audience about how the fact that Biden and Trump, like a century from now, or maybe let's say several centuries from now, the history, if we continue to let mainstream media narrate this, it's going to look totally different to our greatest grandchildren that are going to be the future of the several centuries from now.
I agree with you. Yeah. I just did a report on Arby's. For 55 years, they've had the famous Arby's hat in Hollywood, and they closed. And now, why did they close? Well, the economy is not that great in Southern California, but they also just created a $20 minimum wage. Nobody can say that they didn't know that was coming, but yet they voted for these people who would allow for such a thing to happen. So now you're going to have this huge unemployment. Had they, I'm not going to say that I'm the end all be all of all information, but had they been paying attention to what I was telling people, they would know, don't repeat those mistakes that California and Washington made in a place like Tennessee. So when you look back 100 or 1,000 years ago, I would like to be able to say, or I'll be dead, we all will, and there may not be an internet by then, but I'm hoping that they say, you know, there was this little feisty journalism outlet called Heartland that told us that if they acted like that, this would happen. So I can't say I didn't know, but it happened anyway because they had more money. So I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But that is the mission. The mission is to try to prevent what people say to me all the time. Like, I didn't know that. And I didn't know that person's voting record was like that. And I didn't know that that historical act passed in 1985 would lead to this all these many years later if a bad politician decided to do something bad with it. Well, if you had read my paper, you'd have known.
I have one last question to all your supporters out there that read and listen to your podcast. Would you say that if approached by mainstream media that you would actually leave this business alone, or would you continue say no and continue to strive to make this a better business for those incoming people who want to be in your shoes?
Well, part of my mission is to leave behind a legacy that my children can take over. And then, of course, if I'm lucky enough to have grandchildren or blessed enough, that there would be something for them as well. So they could decide, you know, what avenue of career path they would like, because I don't want them to have to go to work for a company that, like Disney, that we just learned about, is discriminating against certain people that they really shouldn't. It should be based on merit. So if I could get a platform that would help me expand what I'm trying to accomplish, because it does take money. I mean, I'm not going to be foolish and say that it's just free to do this. So go for it, kid. I would do that. But if they all of a sudden reached down and said, well, you know, we have this advertiser, they sell this drug, and you can't really say anything about it from science because that would, you know, scare people away from it, and we're not interested in that, I'd be gone in a second, because I created it for exactly that reason. I was very clear early on that people in Mill Creek were being told things by their doctors that I just couldn't scientifically back. And so they shouldn't listen to those doctors. And if their doctors were adamant, they should find another doctor like I had to do, pediatrician as well. So the answer to your question is no, I would not take a check just to say good luck. Well, here, I can prove it. I sold the Mill Creek View April 1st and started Heartland Journal April 1st later that day. And the people I sold it to had the exact same integrity, the exact same mindset, the exact same independence as me. I would not have done it if all of a sudden USA Today or the Wall Street Journal or Black Press is a Canadian company that used to own the Everett Herald right next door. If they had come to me and said, hey, man, here's a check, we'll just take it from here, I would have said no. Easy for me to say since it didn't happen and there wasn't like $1 million dangled in my nose. But for the most part, no, I'm going to build this until I'm satisfied that it can sustain on its own with the exact same mission, which is a lover of truth.
Well said. And how can the people find you?
The easiest way is heartlandjournal.com. It's on all your favorite podcast platforms as far as the show, the Heartland Journal podcast. So that's Spotify, iTunes, you name it, YouTube Studio, I guess it's called now. But if you want to find me and email me, heartlandjournal.com has every show, every article I've written, the news of the day, and my co-contributors, Vincent Cavallari and Scott Jansen for health.
Thank you so much, everybody, for watching the show. You take care, be safe, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.
You're doing a great job, Kimberly.